The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome everybody. I just want to take a minute and let our attendees get online here. It takes a few minutes for people to upload and we'll allow that technology to do its thing. In the meantime, I will introduce myself. I am Maureen Aslin, the Education Officer at Dying with Dignity Canada, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Raising Your Voice in the 2019 Federal Election. This webinar is part of the End in Mind online education series, which Dying with Dignity Canada launched in early 2017. The purpose of these webinars is to engage Canadians on a broad range of issues related to health, dying, and planning for end of life. We hope that by participating in events like this one, you will come away informed, intrigued, and best of all, empowered. After the webinar, we'll be sending out an email with a survey about today's webinar. Please let us know what you liked or did not like about today's presentation, and also please let us know what topics you'd like to see in the future. And as always, thank you for your support. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues at Dying with Dignity Canada, whom I will introduce in the order in which they will be speaking. Corey Ruff, who is our Advocacy and Media Officer, Rachel Fan, our Digital Specialist, and Alex Tomiko-Dedalt, our Communications Coordinator. Our presentation today will be about 30 minutes long. And please note that if you want to ask a question at any time during the presentation, you can do so by using the GoToWebinar control panel, which is on your screen. If you click on the little arrow point in front of questions on the question bar, it'll open up a screen and then you can type in your question. After all the presentations are finished, I will read your questions for the speakers and we will have a discussion and response. So thank you and welcome speakers. And Corey, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you, Maureen, for the kind introduction. Again, I'm Corey Ruff. I'm Dying with Dignity Canada's Advocacy and Media Engagement Officer. I have to let people know that I'm recovering from a cold, so this is why my voice sounds maybe a little bit more alluring than normal. So thanks for everybody's well wishes and understanding. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the opportunity that we have in front of us. The federal election is coming up, and this is an opportunity for our organization to get our messages out there and to tell the candidates the issues that we're concerned about related to end of life. So Maureen, if I could ask you to go to the next slide. Thank you so much. So an election is expected on October the 21st. That means in all likelihood the election is call is going to be coming in the next week or two. So it's going to be a shorter campaign period than last. So this is why we've been working for months now to put together a number of tools that our supporters can use to raise their voice in the federal election. Why is this important? This is the first election since the legalization of MAID in 2016. So it's the first opportunity during an election campaign to raise our concerns about flaws in assisted dying law and also our hopes for the future of assisted dying in Canada. Another reason is that in 2020 and mid-2020, the government is required, Parliament is required to conduct a review of the law, and that could result in recommendations or changes to the law. So this is the perfect opportunity to identify problems that exist with the law and our recommendations on how to fix them. Finally, as I mentioned, there are unfair restrictions and outstanding flaws in the law. Dying with Dignity Canada has been talking about these basically since the law was tabled, and now we have a better understanding of how these flaws are affecting people who are trying to navigate their options, their rights, their choices. So as everyone knows, this is an extremely serious issue. It has grave consequences for people's lives and the quality of their deaths. So this is something that we're trying to communicate with the parties and candidates, and we thank you for your help and getting the message out there as well. And if we could go to the next slide. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Dying with Dignity Canada's role, and I understand that there are going to be questions probably coming for later on, or questions that we've received by email. People are wondering, which party or which candidate would Dying with Dignity Canada endorse? And as a charity, we cannot do that for reasons that I can explain in some depth. But as a charity, Dying with Dignity can and must contribute to public policy debates, both inside and outside election periods, as long as these activities support our charitable purposes. Our human rights advocacy must always be nonpartisan. As a charity, we can't conduct any partisan activity, and there are specific rules about what constitutes partisan and nonpartisan advocacy. But for the purposes of our discussion today, we can't and we won't express support, nor will we actively oppose a particular party or candidate. The purpose of our election actions is to empower our supporters to raise their voices during the election period. So we're not telling people whom to vote for, whom not to vote for, whether to vote at all, but we're giving people tools that they can use to inform their candidates about the issues, about their concerns, and hopefully to make a commitment to improving the state of affairs and to always uphold Canadians' end-of-life rights. These are just tools. They don't stop people as individual voters or supporters from making independent decisions or having conversations based upon their own beliefs and values. That is your right. There are certain restrictions and responsibilities that we have, and we want to, and we will uphold those, but you can use these materials are free for you to use as you see fit, just as long as you know that you're speaking as an individual and not on behalf of the organization. So just had to give that caveat. So in the next slide, I'll talk about the three main asks that are reflected in our campaign materials. So if Maureen, if you could flip over to that one, that would be great. Thank you so much. So we are calling on all parties and candidates to commit to the following. Number one, to, at the beginning of the next session of Parliament, pass an amendment in memory of Halifax's Audrey Parker that would give people who have been assessed as eligible and approved for assisted dying the option to receive it in the event that they lose capacity. So many people on this session right now are probably familiar with the story of Halifax's Audrey Parker. Audrey Parker was diagnosed in 2000, I think it was back in 2016 with cancer, and in 2018 she was assessed and approved for assisted dying. She had wanted to live until after Christmas, which was her favorite time of year. But because of a flaw in the federal assisted dying law, she chose to end her life on November 1st, months or weeks before she really wanted to access assisted dying. The reason that it was the case was because of a flaw in the assisted dying law that requires people who've already gone through the rigorous process of being assessed and approved for assisted dying to be competent right before it's provided. So if a person loses capacity after they've been assessed and approved for assisted dying, if they can't reconfirm their wishes for MAID, they lose out on the ability to access it. This imposes huge problems on people like Audrey, who might be in severe pain at the end of their lives, and for whom their capacity might be in question, or they might be at risk of losing capacity rather. So we see that people, for example, end up weaning themselves off really important pain medication because they're fearful that they won't have the capacity to consent at the last moment right before MAID is provided. Other people, they like Audrey, decide to end their lives earlier than they want because of this flaw in the law. So this is a story that has been on the top of our minds here at Dying with Dignity Canada over the last year, and that many of our supporters have been very vocal about. Next, and this one is kind of related, is for candidates to commit to lifting the ban on advance requests for assisted dying. Many people who support this organization want to be able to make a request for assisted dying now that could be honored months or years later after they've lost capacity. This is a particular concern to people who are facing a diagnosis of dementia, Alzheimer's, or have a condition like Alzheimer's run in their family. So this is, again, top of mind for us here at the organization and our supporters across the country. Finally, this is kind of a catch-all that all parliamentarians that they have a duty to uphold the Constitution, including the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that extends to the rules around MAID. We at Dying with Dignity Canada believe that there are a number of restrictions in the assisted dying law that discriminate against people unfairly or subject them to unwanted and unnecessary suffering, and as a result, violate people's charter rights. As a human rights charity, part of our work is to ensure that Canada's assisted dying laws comply with the Constitution, including the Charter, and part of our messaging, part of our calls to action during the election is to amplify that call that parliamentarians, regardless of their political stripe, have a duty to uphold your end of life rights. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel in a moment. She is going to be going through the digital tools that we're making available for people to raise their voice to their candidates. With no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dying with Dignity Canada's Digital Communications Coordinator, Rachel Pham.
Thanks, Corey. Maureen, could I get access to share my screen, please? Sorry. Oh, here we go. All right. So, as Corey mentioned, we have some exciting tools and actions and resources for our supporters to use to raise your voice ahead of the federal election. And I'm really excited to walk you through two of the actions that we have available that you can access right on our website through dyingwithdignity.ca. So once you get to our homepage, which you can see here, you'll see at the bottom here, raise your voice in the federal election, and clicking on that will send you to our new election hub, which is where you can access all our actions and our resources to voice your choice ahead of the federal elections. So here in the election hub, you'll see at the top here, our toolkit, which my colleague Alex will walk us through shortly, and then below that will be where our tools will live. Right now there's only one because we are currently working through some kinks of the other one, but I'll walk you through both so that when both are ready that you'll be able to use those. So right now you can email your candidates, so I'll just go to that form right here. It's very straightforward, this one. It's quite similar to other petitions we've had in the past, other forms. So from here, you'll see just a place where you put all your information. It's really important that you have a working email address for this, just so when you send in your email to your candidates, they're able to email you back in response. And then it's really important also that you're careful in putting in your postal code, because this is how the system will recognize which candidates are currently registered in your riding. And it is important to note that there are some ridings, or there are some postal codes that perhaps are new, so the system might not recognize those right away. So if you do run into that issue, please email us either at info@dyingwithdignity.ca or election@dyingwithdignity.ca, and we will help you troubleshoot that. So here you'll see the email. You can send it as is. It walks through all of the election asks that Corey just helpfully walked through. Or you could, if you're willing and comfortable, you could customize it. You could add a personal anecdote, or explain why end-of-life issues are so important to you. Of course, there's no pressure to do that, but if you do go that route, it is very powerful and compelling for candidates to read those personalized letters. Yeah, and from there, you can opt in to decide whether or not you want to stay informed about the federal election or other DWDC campaigns, and then you can send your message, and then all the candidates who are registered in your riding will receive your email. So again, quite straightforward. The other tool, which currently is not live yet, just because we're hammering out a lot of the kinks, but will be available soon, is an option to phone your candidates. So this is really exciting. We've never had an action like this before, so we're excited to launch it. So the purpose of this tool is once you submit all your information and you press make the call, the system will call you and patch you through to your candidates. So it's really important that you have your phone beside you, ready, so you can take that call and be patched through to your candidate. So similar to the email a candidate action, you just fill it out. And this one, you do need your phone number because, of course, you're calling. And again, having a recognizable postal code is helpful, and that will populate the candidates who are registered in your riding. Again, if there is an issue and the system doesn't recognize your postal code, you will be patched through to a member of the DWDC staff, and we will personally help you find the candidates in your riding and help you with their phone number so you can call them. All right, so once everything's in, I can see that I have one representative here in my riding, and then I would press make the call, and then I'm not going to accept the call right now, but once that is done, I will receive a phone call, and it's a little slow right now, but it should direct you to a thank you page right here where it will give you some talking points to assist you on your phone call, and it also encourages you at the bottom here to tell a personal story so you can in your conversation with your candidate. And it's also important to note that in many instances, you might be patched through to a voicemail or to a receptionist, and in those instances, we encourage you to leave a detailed voicemail explaining why you care about end-of-life issues with your contact information so the candidate can reach out to you and you can have that conversation. Or if you're patched through to a receptionist, we encourage you to make an appointment with your candidate so you can talk to them about why end-of-life issues are important to you. So these are our two actions. Again, because the phone your candidate is not quite ready yet, we encourage you to check regularly throughout this week. It should be live very soon, so you can have that option available to you to raise your voice. So yeah, now I will send it over to my colleague, Alex Dedalt, who will walk us through the election toolkit.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I'm going to be speaking with you today about our toolkit, which is one of the actions in kind of the host of resources we have there on our election hub. So Rachel took you through going to our homepage, clicking on that lovely picture of Parliament, and then you'll see all the things you can do. The toolkit is right there at the top. It's something that you can either view online as a PDF, you have it on your iPad, even on your phone, or you can go ahead and print that out. We made sure it was easy to print. So that's where you'll find it. If you could go to the next slide, please, Maureen. Thank you. All right, so what's in the toolkit? It's 11 pages total, so not too long, but it's got everything you need to know. Once you've completed the email a candidate action and the phone a rep action, and if you want to get a little more involved or you want to start having conversations in your community and with your candidates, this is a really good rundown of how you can begin starting those conversations. So to begin, we have an overview of a lot of what Corey explained at the beginning of the call. What are our parameters as a charity? what are our 3 main election asks? What is the broad election strategy for this 2019 federal election? So you'll find all of that there. And then if you move into the next section, it's all about meetings with candidates. So we'll walk you through kind of the different steps to make that happen, as well as the steps afterwards. And there'll also be ways to engage with candidates and other voters at a public event or, community affair. If there's a barbecue and the candidates are going to be there, how can you best engage with them? And then we'll have frequently asked questions, both about the issue, but also questions that, you can pose to your candidates or people might pose to you, knowing you're a supporter. As well as a leave behind sheet that you can hand over to candidates or hand over to other community members when you attend meetings or events. So that's a broad overview. We'll go into a little bit more detail. Maureen, if you could click the next slide, please. Thank you. So the next part is meetings with candidates. So if you know the candidates in your riding, you've already given them your email, you've explained why it's important to you, you've phoned, and you want to take it the next step, we'll let you know how to set up that meeting. There's a script for making a phone call to try to get a meeting, as well as an email draft if you want to reach out that way. It's really important to keep in mind that they are very busy, as you can imagine, perhaps the busiest they've been. They're trying to fit a lot of things into their schedule in a very short period of time. So just some tips on making sure that you're being accommodating. Maybe you're asking for 15, 20 minutes of their time in order to really get your points across, as opposed to maybe asking for an hour-long meeting and not being able to get into their schedule. So there's some tips in there for setting up and asking for a meeting, as well as the suggested meeting agenda. There's a lot to talk about. Corey went over the election asks, and for someone that might not know a lot about end-of-life rights, it can be a little complicated. So how do you begin that conversation? How do you make sure you get all the important points in there, but also make it personal and talk about why it's really important to you as a voter and as a person? So we have a suggested meeting agenda, but of course, we want you to feel empowered to take this resource and do what you will with it. So go ahead and customize it, whatever you feel comfortable doing. Please go for it. It's all suggestions. And then afterwards, we have that thank you letter / email. So once you've taken the time to meet with that candidate, make sure you're following up. Let them know, I really appreciated our conversation. I know time is short for you. Here's what we spoke about. You can send along a take-home sheet. You can send along a PDF of it. Mention a couple of things you might have chatted about. Just make sure that they know that you're holding them to task on the issue of end-of-life rights, and that if elected, you're going to be checking in on them, right? So we have all those drafts for you there, and worth taking a look at. If we go to the next slide, please. All right, so what if you can't or don't want to meet with a candidate one-on-one in their office? What can you do in order to continue this conversation? So something we've prepared is questions to ask at a debate or a public event. We know time can be even shorter if you're at some kind of a public event. If you only have 30 seconds to ask a question, how are you going to word that? So we have some information for you on questions to ask around our election priorities, as well as just tips on making your voice heard when you are in that public setting. I think it's very helpful to identify yourself as a voter within that candidate's riding. It kind of hits home for them in a different way. But I do want to note, we ask you do not speak on behalf of Dying with Dignity Canada at a public event or to the media unless you've spoken directly with us and received explicit approval to do so. When you attend events like this, we are so grateful and overjoyed you're part of the movement, but we want to make sure you're identifying as an individual voter and someone that's passionate about this issue, not as a member of our team or speaking on behalf of the organization. So just a small note. But I've seen great media coverage of people across the country at different public events, get to know the candidate events, barbecues, fairs, and I know there's just more to come. So if you're passionate about those things and you're going to be out there anyways, go with some of our tips as well as a few leave behind sheets, because you can also hand those out to candidates and to other attendees. All right, and the next slide, please. Great. And then we have a really sizable frequently asked questions section. We know that this is a complicated issue in a lot of ways. People have a lot of questions. You might have some questions as well. And so we put together an area that kind of runs down the most common questions that we hear here at the national office, or how to respond to some of the most kind of common, perhaps not so supportive comments or statements. So these are just examples that you're seeing here on this slide. How would an advance request for MAID work? Does MAID hurt efforts to improve or expand palliative care? Statements around like assisted dying is wrong or I don't agree with it. And then how do I respond if a conversation, so if you were to head out to a barbecue or to a candidate's event, what if it unfortunately starts to take a turn? So we've taken all of these questions and put them on a few pages for you with some suggested answers. I think they'll be really helpful. I do want to make a note about that last question, that if a conversation with a candidate or a member of the public turns hostile, negative, you feel a little nervous, ultimately the most important thing for us is your safety and your comfort. So we would never ask any of our volunteers or supporters to do anything they're not comfortable with, so you take care of yourself. But there are also some tips in there for de-escalation if you feel comfortable maybe having an open conversation with someone and trying to change their viewpoint. So there's lots of great resources in the frequently asked questions. If there's anything in there that you have more questions about, or if there are questions that we didn't answer, we encourage you to reach out to election@dyingwithdignity.ca. We'd love to hear anything else that we can answer for you. Heading into the next slide, please. So the very last page of this toolkit, I think in a lot of ways is very, very valuable, and that it's a great summary of everything we've talked about on the call, but also kind of a lot of the different pieces of the election toolkit. If you want to leave someone with one sheet of paper that sums up what we're doing this election, sums up a lot of the work that we do, as well as, why is this important now, like Corey ran over, this is your go-to sheet. So print off a few copies of these for yourself, but also to take along to events and to meetings. It's a really great way to brief yourself and also others on the key facts on the issue. So that's our leave behind sheet, and that closes out the toolkit. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what people across the country are going to do with it. To go to the next slide, promotion for all of these pieces that we've talked about today, the digital tools and the toolkit, they're in that election hub on the website. So we're sharing that on social media, we're sending it out, but we also want you to pass it along to people in your communities, to post it on Facebook, to tweet it out, and just to let people know that these are available, and if this is something that's really important to them, that these resources are here, and we really hope they get engaged and empowered ahead of the federal election this fall. So thank you very much. I think we're going to open it up.
That's right. Thank you, Alex, and thanks for everybody who's to Rachel and Corey as well. The next slide we have here is just questions. We'll go to a Q&A time right now. If you want to ask a question now on the webinar, you can click on the questions tab in the control panel and ask us a question directly. We have a couple already. And if there's something that you think of after the webinar is over, you can certainly ask us at election@dyingwithdignity.ca. You can contact us at that email address anytime with questions that you have about the election, and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as possible and answer your question. So first of all, I have a question coming from the one of the chapters. Do you happen to know, okay, so this is a specific question. Do you happen to know how the 4 federal parties voted when the bill was passed, Bill C-14, and also whether any party has taken a formal stance since then? They think that would be very helpful to know in advance of talking to any candidates. and I'll turn that over to Corey. Do you have a response to that question?
Yes, I think so. So in terms of candidate, or rather MPs voting records on Bill C-14, the parties, I think it was a number of parties held free votes on the issue. So people's support for or against assisted dying isn't necessarily, it's not necessarily apparent, because people would have voted for or against the bill for a whole host of reasons. There's some people who would have voted for the bill because they opposed assisted dying, others who voted against it because they felt that it was too restrictive and that it violated the Constitution. So, and again, we at Dying with Dignity Canada will neither sort of directly suggest or imply whom to vote for or whom not to vote for, but happy to provide information. I don't know if this is possible, Maureen, if it's possible to share a link with people who are on the webinar right now, but if let's see.
I may be able to do that, Corey. Why don't you carry on, and I will see if I can post something.
Okay, sounds good.
There's a chat box, so if people want to note in the chat box in the control panel for the GoToWebinar, I can type the link there.
Okay, sounds good. I had the link. I've lost it, but I'll come back with it. But I'll give it with the caveat that it's not necessarily indicative of a person or party's stance on assisted dying. And also, a lot has changed in 3 years, and because of the work of this organization and work on the grassroots level by supporters of Dying with Dignity Canada, or people who are working in the healthcare field, that understanding of and support for assisted dying has evolved in the last 3 and a bit years. So I'd give that caveat before sharing that. And in terms of parties' current positions, that we're in the process of asking different parties for their positions. We may or may not get a response. We would like to find some way of sharing that information with our supporters. But again, it would be, these positions would be posted without comment for informational purposes. But if that information is forthcoming, and I will emphasize that we are seeking it, that we would make that available to people so they can be informed.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is, this is from somebody who is a volunteer in one of the chapters, and they say, as well, I am working with a federal party on the election, so would this prohibit me from talking to others, again, as a private citizen? So they're working on a particular candidate's campaign. They're wondering if there's a prohibition against speaking to other candidates as a private citizen. Is there any conflict there?
I guess I'll take this one. Just off the top of my head, and others on the panel might have thoughts as well, but I think that's something that you would have to take up with the campaign, because from our perspective, we want our supporters to, as much as possible, engage with everyone. Again, our position is that we want all candidates to know that end-of-life rights matter to people in Canada, and we have a responsibility to engage with everyone, or with as many candidates as possible. So if you as a private individual wish to do so, we would be just immensely grateful on our end. But if you think that there's a conflict with your responsibilities to the party, I would suggest talking with them about that. But again, it's we're just so thankful that people would engage with their candidates locally, and yeah, I don't have much more to add than that. It just seems, thank you.
Great, thanks, Corey. We have a question on the production of the kit, and somebody wants the leave behind sheet, wondering if we can do it in black and white only, because they can only produce it in black and white, and if we can get something that isn't as darkly shaded or contrasty. Alex, do you want to
Sure.
respond to that one?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a great one. The less ink, the better. I think that that's something we could absolutely arrange. If you email us, whether it's Maureen or election@dyingwithdignity.ca, I think it would be very straightforward to make that available to you so you can print as many copies as you want.
That's great. Thank you, Alex. A related question, I think this might be one for Corey once again. I'm worried that lobbying a federal candidate would make the issue a party issue when really we want support from all parties. And they would like you to comment on that, as we're trying to be nonpartisan and open discussion.
We definitely, thanks for the question, and I think it is a good one, and thanks for expressing your concern. We're completely in agreement. We don't want medical assistance in dying to become a partisan issue. That we believe that this is an issue that people across the political spectrum care about, and again, our message is that all candidates, if they are elected to office, have a responsibility to uphold people's end-of-life rights, and that's why we're encouraging people, if at all possible, to engage with as many candidates in their riding as possible, and we as an organization have a responsibility to engage with all the major parties running in the election. So our election is nonpartisan, that we want people to know that we are nonpartisan. This issue does not have a particular color or stripe, and so we would encourage people to carry that message with them, that they are engaging with all parties, that this is not an issue that belongs to any single party or candidate, and the history of the issue reflects that there have been advocates for medical assistance in dying, people who fought for this right, pioneers who have represented all the major parties or no party, so that this is not a partisan issue, and that's a message that we really want to get out there, that our organization as a human rights charity expects any government or parliament that forms power to uphold people's rights, and that we look forward to working with them to protecting people's rights and choices.
Great. A question about point 1 and 2, that the asks that you specifically spoke about, they seem quite similar. And could the difference be clarified, please? So the issue around Audrey Parker's amendment, and then access advance.
That's great. I can speak to this, that they are very related, because they do relate generally to the concept of advance requests for assisted dying. In learning more about this issue over the past few years, and particularly when Audrey Parker shared her story in the media last year, it helped us understand two broad groups who are affected by the ban on advance requests for assisted dying. One is the assessed and approved group. This is the group of people who have already been assessed as eligible for assisted dying. That means that 2 independent doctors or nurse practitioners have asserted that that person satisfies all of the eligibility requirements satisfied in the law. So they've done their assessments, they've been approved by 2 clinicians, all their paperwork has been done. The only thing that has yet to take place is, the administration of assisted dying. Maybe a date has been set, maybe that they've been approved, but they're waiting to set a date. That group of people in the assessed and approved category face a very particular set of challenges, and in many cases that we've heard, that people are ending their lives too early because of this requirement in the law that they reconfirm their consent at the very last minute, that others have would forego proper pain medication because they fear losing capacity before they can give that last minute consent. That's a particular group of people, and their concerns are somewhat different. And their needs are very, very urgent. That's not to say that people in this other group, people who want to make an advance request for assisted dying, it's not to say that their concerns aren't grave and aren't urgent, but in terms of making the ask to policymakers, it's been in our experience easier to kind of communicate the needs of those particular groups by speaking about them separately. But if, for example, that advance requests were legalized, certainly that would have positive consequences for people in the assessed and approved category. So thanks for identifying that there is a strong relationship there. And for example, the Council of Canadian Academies, the group that was tasked by the federal government to study 3 groups of people who were discriminated against by the law. They, the assessed and approved group and the advance request group, their situations are broken down, but they're all in the same report, the advance request report. So it makes sense that that there would be some overlap and there might be some confusion that stems from it. But we felt that in terms of telling policymakers about this and getting these issues out there into the mainstream, it's been helpful to look at stories from both of the different groups rather than conflating them.
Mm-hmm. Great. I don't see any new questions online, so I'm going to make a call for questions here. And if we've satisfied the ones that have come in so far, there are a couple of questions I'm going to take offline simply because they're a little more personal and not generalized to everybody on the webinar event. In lieu of no further questions coming in, I will remind people that election@dyingwithdignity.ca. You can send in your questions after the webinar, and we'll be happy to answer them. And our next section of this, we thought we'd do a very, very brief update on some of the other advocacy issues that we are working on, and have that be the tie-up for the webinar. So we will ask Corey to give us updates on the things that he is working on. We are all working on together here.
Thanks again, Maureen. And there are only 2 bullet points here. They're related to Dying with Dignity Canada's advocacy around the flaws in Bill C-14. This does not cover all of the advocacy work that we're doing, which is very broad. We just figured that we would focus on these 2 pieces because there are timely updates. And also I'm running out of lozenges and I've talked too much. So I think this will be good for today. Just the 2 updates is Dying with Dignity Canada was involved in a case in Quebec. The case was focused. 2 plaintiffs sued the Quebec government and the federal government to challenge restrictions in both the provincial and federal assisted dying laws. So in the federal assisted dying law, the plaintiffs are challenging the requirement that one's natural death must be reasonably foreseeable. In the case of the 2 plaintiffs, Jean Chuchon and Nicole Gladue, that they have severe chronic illnesses, but they have been assessed as their natural death is not reasonably foreseeable, and that they're suing for the right to access assisted dying, saying that that rule is unconstitutional. That case was heard in February and March in Montreal. Dying with Dignity Canada, along with our sister organization, AQDMD in Quebec, were co-interveners in the case. We supported the plaintiffs. We're expecting a decision in that case any time. So the the judge is basically considering whether that criterion, the natural death is reasonably foreseeable, infringes the rights of the two plaintiffs, and whether it is constitutional. So we hope to have updates. We'll have updates for our supporters as soon as they're available, but just wanted to let you know that that decision could be coming down at any time. So we're very anxious to hear about that. Second, and this one is related in BC, that BC Civil Liberties Association, along with their co-plaintiff Julia Lamb, have launched a similar challenge against the federal assisted dying law. It's slightly more broad, but the reasonably foreseeable rule comes into play as well. They are challenging that rule. That case was launched just, I think it was less than 2 weeks after the MAID law was passed in June 2016. After a long delay, it's set to be heard starting on the 18th of November, and the trial is set to go into the middle of December with a 1-week break. Again, like in Quebec, Dying with Dignity Canada will be making arguments in the case as an intervener in support of the plaintiffs, Julia Lamb and the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association. So we'll be making a written submission, and also our pro bono lawyer, whose name is Angus Gunn, will be making oral arguments in court on our behalf. So we're excited about that, excited to share with you the arguments that we're making in defense of people's end-of-life rights and constitutional rules surrounding end-of-life choice. And we'll have more updates for you on that in the late fall. So thank you so much for listening to my many updates and for the wonderful presentations that my colleagues have given. And I don't know, Maureen, if we have any more questions from folks, but just want to thank you for tuning in.
I'll turn my microphone on, and now you can. I don't believe we have any questions. That wraps it up. The other ones we can answer offline. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, if you have questions for us, election singular at dyingwithdignity.ca. Please send us questions, and we also have recorded this session. So if you want to watch it, or you know other folks who would like to watch the webinar in the future, it will be posted on our webinar on our website on past webinar page. And that is it for today. So we thank you all very much, and take good care. Alrighty, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all our panelists. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.